Arrogant staff splashed mud on a black woman, unaware she is their new boss. 24 hours later, they begged for mercy. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel as we dish out fresh, engaging stories daily. Enjoy the story. It was a cold Monday morning when Monalisa, a 33-year-old woman, was making her way to work to resume as the new regional director at Halcyon Innovations. Little did she know that the day had other plans. She never saw it coming. She was standing by the side of Hamilton Road, the city of Texas still wrapped in the lingering gray of an early morning storm. The air smelled of wet pavement and hope. Her navy blue coat clung to her shoulders, heels soaked from her careful steps across slick sidewalks. Despite the chill, she stood with elegance, head high, eyes calm. Today was the start of something new. A new title, a new chapter, a new kind of respect. But fate, or foolishness, had another scene in mind. From around the corner, a white company van barreled through the puddle-strewn street, its tires spinning through a deep gutter filled with dirty rainwater. Monalisa barely had time to flinch. In one careless second, the van's wheels sliced through the muck and hurled a cascade of muddy water straight at her. The splash was deafening. Cold, violent. Water slapped against her body with no mercy, coating her from chest to heel. Her polished coat darkened. Her tailored trousers clung to her skin. Her face, once radiant with the promise of the day, dripped with dirty rainwater and humiliation. Inside the van, laughter erupted. The windows were slightly down, just enough for her to hear it. The mocking voices, the slapstick giggles. One man leaned halfway out of the window and shouted with bold cruelty, "Should have stayed on the sidewalk, lady." The van didn't slow. It sped off, the tires splashing smaller puddles as if the road belonged only to them. Monalisa stood frozen. Not out of shock, but out of choice. Her breath steady, her posture unwavering, her expression unreadable. Her fists did not clench. Her voice did not rise. She simply reached into her handbag and pulled out a monogrammed white handkerchief, the initials MC stitched in gold thread. She dabbed her face slowly, with practiced composure. To the ordinary eye, it might have looked like she was just cleaning herself up, but anyone who understood power would recognize the moment for what it was. A storm within that chose not to rage, but to rise. Her eyes followed the direction the van had gone, not with vengeance, but with quiet calculation. The kind of look that doesn't forget. The kind of memory that writes names in silence and waits for the right time. And then she walked on. 5 minutes later, she arrived at her destination. Halcyon Innovations HQ stood tall and pristine, its glass doors gleaming, its marble lobby polished to perfection. The security guard barely looked up as she entered, probably assumed she was one of the junior staff or a late contractor. No one knew yet. Not today. The brass plate near the door read, Halcyon Innovations, Regional Office, Texas Division. She adjusted the collar of her coat, wiped her heels briefly on the lobby mat, and made her way inside. At that same moment, just 2 floors above her, the staff lounge buzzed with laughter and the hiss of a coffee machine. 5 staff members lounged casually, not a worry in their world. Among them were Devin, the man who had driven the van, and Marcus, whose voice always carried like a bad trumpet in a quiet room. They were still talking about her. "Man, did you see her face?" Marcus howled, tossing his coffee stirrer aside like it offended him. She looked like one of those job applicants who just got off the bus from nowhere. Devin leaned back, arms behind his head. "I did her a favor. She needed a wake-up call. This is the city. You don't stand in puddle territory." One of the women in the group, Tanya, gave a nervous chuckle, but her eyes darted toward the glass wall of the hallway. Her laugh faded. "We shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "What if someone reports it?" Devin snorted. "Please. Nobody knows her. She's probably already dried off," and cried it out. "Besides," he added smugly, "my uncle practically built this company. I'm not going anywhere." Their arrogance echoed louder than the rain outside. They went on like that for a while, laughing, sipping lattes, tossing away decency like paper napkins. No remorse, no awareness. Just a group of overconfident staff floating in their own bubble of entitlement. What none of them noticed was the receptionist at the front desk, who had looked up briefly when Monalisa entered. Her brows had furrowed in recognition, not because of the soaked clothes, but because the name Monalisa Campbell had been circulating for days. Whispers of her appointment had passed through internal memos, mentioned in board meetings. The name meant something, and now the face matched the name. She watched as Monalisa disappeared down the hallway toward the executive offices. She said nothing, but her expression said everything. Back in the staff lounge, Marcus was halfway through another tasteless impression when Devin leaned forward, smirking. "You know," he said, "she actually turned around after we hit her. She looked straight at us, like we mattered or something." Tanya bit her lip. "We should really be careful. I heard something about a new regional director starting today." Devin waved her off. Yeah, I've heard that for 2 weeks. Probably some old guy from New York who'll never leave his office." Just then, an email alert popped up on the wall screen. Company-wide meeting at 10 a.m., mandatory attendance. Meet the new regional director. They barely paid it any attention. Another meeting. Another name. No big deal. But the receptionist down in the lobby couldn't help but smirk to herself as she picked up the office intercom. "Executive suite," she said, her voice even. "Yes, Miss Campbell has arrived." The air in the 11th floor conference room of Halcyon Innovations was unusually heavy that morning. It wasn't the weather, though the gray skies still hovered beyond the glass walls. But something less visible, something taut. It was the kind of tension that filled a room when change was in the air but had not yet announced itself. Every department head was seated. Executive assistants lined the back wall, tablets in hand. The long oval table gleamed under the pendant lights, dotted with pitchers of lemon water and untouched notepads. Conversations, once lively, had simmered into low murmurs, eyes flicking toward the door like restless students awaiting a headmaster. Devin sat slouched in his chair, legs stretched out arrogantly, sipping lukewarm coffee from a company mug. Next to him, Marcus tapped a pen against the table's edge, flashing his usual grin, the same one that masked insecurity with forced confidence. Tanya sat stiffly, jaw clenched, her mind not fully in the room. They had all seen the email. Company-wide briefing, 10 a.m. sharp subject. New regional director introduction, no name. No face. Just a title. But enough to stir gossip in every hallway and ignite speculation in the group chats. Rumors had already begun. Some claimed it was a man from the Boston branch with a reputation for gutting departments. Others whispered about a woman from London, stern but fair, who'd once shut down an entire division in a single day. But no one had considered the unthinkable, that the woman they had humiliated just yesterday could be walking into this room as the one in charge. A faint knock disrupted the room's nervous stillness. Everyone turned. The CEO's assistant, Mr. Rayford, walked to the front. A small man in his 50s, always wearing suits too big for his frame and stress too heavy for his eyes, adjusted his tie 3 times before clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice cracking slightly, "please rise to welcome our new regional director." The room stood, chairs screeching against the polished floor. Then, the double doors opened, and the entire atmosphere changed. The woman who entered was not the figure they mocked yesterday. Gone was the soaked navy blue coat, the messy hair, the drenched heels. In her place stood a striking woman with flawless posture and unshakable presence. She wore a sharp charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, a cream silk blouse beneath, and heels that echoed with every step she took across the marble tile, like a judge walking toward the bench. Her hair was pulled back in a smooth bun. Her skin glowed, unbothered. Her eyes, deep, dark, and unforgiving, scanned the room with calm calculation. Monalisa Campbell had arrived. Devin's coffee halted mid-sip. His eyes widened, his throat clenching before he could swallow. The cup trembled slightly in his hand. Marcus, who had been chuckling seconds before, froze, lips parted, pen still mid-tap in the air. He looked like someone who'd seen a ghost in a courtroom, one who could speak. Tanya pressed her hand to her mouth, a gasp caught in her throat. A flush of red swept across her cheeks. Shame, recognition, disbelief, all at once. No one said a word, and Monalisa said nothing at first. She walked directly to the head of the table, placed her leather-bound folder gently on the surface, and stood still for a heartbeat. The silence was louder than any siren. "Good morning," she said finally. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to deliver power. Every syllable landed like punctuation in a verdict. Recognition. The kind of look that doesn't ask for permission or approval. The kind of look that declares, "I remember everything." Marcus shifted in his seat, his body betraying the internal panic he was desperately trying to suppress. His hand reached instinctively for the notepad in front of him, though he didn't know what to write. He couldn't look at her. Not fully. Devin clenched his jaw. Sweat dotted his temples. A man who prided himself on being untouchable, now shackled by his own disgrace. Tanya, meanwhile, couldn't hide her shame. Her eyes glossed, her breath shallow. She knew. She had laughed. She had been part of it. But unlike the others, Tanya remembered that moment on the sidewalk. The way Monalisa didn't flinch. The way her eyes burned without fire, cold and calm. It was that restraint that haunted her now. Monalisa's eyes lingered just a moment longer before sweeping to the rest of the room. "I won't waste time with long speeches," she said, placing her folder flat against the table. "You'll learn everything you need to know in time. For now, all I ask is that you do what you were hired to do, professionally, ethically, and with basic human decency." No one dared move. Her eyes flicked, once more, to the trio. But actions speak louder than introductions, don't they? Marcus dropped his pen. It clattered on the table like a gavel, slamming down. A few seats away, another department lead cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to diffuse the tension. But Monalisa wasn't rattled. Not even slightly. "I believe in structure," she said. "I believe in performance. And I believe in accountability. In the next 48 hours, I will be reviewing all department operations, personnel conduct files, and team reports. If anything concerns me, trust me, we will talk." The words were direct, without embellishment. Devin finally found his voice. "Ms. Campbell," he started, "I just want to say," but her hand lifted slightly, just enough to silence him. "There will be time for individual conversations," she said, her tone final. "Right now, I expect full attention and professional decorum. That includes everyone." He sat back, red-faced and rattled. The rest of the staff stared at her, trying to decode how she could remain so calm, so controlled. But they didn't know what Monalisa had trained herself to be, not just a woman who survives the world, but one who shapes it. She didn't need to retaliate with rage. Her presence was the rebuttal. Her title was the answer. Her walk through those double doors was justice enough. After a moment, she turned to Mr. Rayford. "Please distribute the updated organizational structure," she instructed. "I've made a few preliminary changes." "Yes, ma'am," he replied quickly, almost relieved to have something to do. As he moved down the table, passing out the documents, murmurs began to rise, soft and unsure. Some looked at the sheets with mild curiosity. Others scanned for their names. Devin didn't even reach for his. He knew whatever was written there couldn't undo what had already been written in Monalisa's memory. She closed her folder and straightened her jacket. "Meeting adjourned. You may return to your stations." Chairs moved hesitantly. No one stood until she stepped away from the table. And as she exited the room, heels clicking against the tile, the silence behind her wasn't just respect. It was fear. It was awe. It was the sound of a hierarchy shifting forever. The meeting had ended, but the silence it left behind still clung to the hallways like a fog that refused to lift. Monalisa Campbell stepped out of the boardroom, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor of Halcyon Innovations. Heads turned subtly as she passed, some curious, others nervous, and a few visibly shaken. But Monalisa moved with the poise of someone who wasn't here to perform. She wasn't here for applause, revenge, or spectacle. She was here to lead. Each stride she took through the corridor felt deliberate. She didn't walk like someone new to the building. She walked like the walls had been waiting for her to come home. Her eyes didn't dart or wander, they observed. Quietly, carefully. This wasn't a woman trying to prove a point. This was a woman who had already made it. On the 12th floor, just outside the HR suite, Claire, the head of human resources, stepped out and gently closed the door behind her. She spotted Monalisa approaching and adjusted the scarf around her neck. "Miss Campbell," Claire said, keeping her voice low, "we heard what happened outside yesterday with the van." Monalisa paused, her face composed. The name still sat unfamiliar on their tongues, like they weren't quite sure whether to fear it or respect it yet. Maybe both. Claire continued. Several staff members came forward, off the record. Some are worried, some ashamed. Monalisa gave a small nod. "Let's not rush," she replied calmly, barely moving her lips. "Let's listen first." Her tone was like glass, smooth, cool, and impossible to cling to. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't threat. It was something more precise. She hadn't come to destroy, but she wouldn't let rot spread unchecked either. By late afternoon, she had taken over the corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Texas, the skyline softened by a late winter haze. Her desk was sparse. A leather notepad, a black Mont-Blanc pen, and a crystal vase holding a single white lily. It wasn't for show. It was for focus. One by one, files landed on her desk. Profiles, histories, infractions, complaints too subtle to be formalized but too persistent to ignore. Claire had been efficient. She always was. Then came a soft knock. "Come in," Monalisa said, still looking down. A young woman entered quietly, holding a steaming mug of coffee with both hands. She wore a burgundy cardigan over a simple blouse, ID badge hanging slightly askew. Her steps were cautious but not timid. "Miss Campbell," she said. "Your coffee." Monalisa finally looked up. The woman stepped forward and set the mug down gently. "I wasn't sure how you liked it, so I brought the HR blend. It's mild." Monalisa studied her face. She was young, mid-20s, maybe. Honest eyes. No polish, but plenty of intention. "What's your name?" Monalisa asked. "Nina Price," the young woman said, straightening slightly. "I'm just a junior assistant. I've only been here a month." Monalisa's gaze softened. Just a month. That explained why her face wasn't among the arrogant ones from the van. Nina hesitated, then added, "I saw them yesterday. Laughing. When they got back. I didn't know who you were, but it wasn't right. The way they talked. The way they joked. There was no agenda in her voice. No attempt to impress. Just the kind of courage that surfaces when someone refuses to be silent in the face of cruelty, even when silence would be easier." Monalisa tilted her head slightly. "And you?" Nina blinked. "Me? Yes. What did you do when you heard them?" I didn't laugh," Nina said carefully. "But I didn't speak up either. I didn't think I had the right." Silence hovered in the space between them. Then, to Nina's surprise, Monalisa smiled. "Then you're exactly who I want near me," she said. Nina exhaled, as though she had been holding her breath since the moment she knocked. Her shoulders relaxed. "Thank you," she whispered. Monalisa reached for her pen and jotted something in the margin of her notepad. Not Nina's name, but a thought. A reminder. The kind of people who notice and don't speak, they're still watching. And sometimes, those are the ones worth teaching how to lead. Nina turned to leave, but Monalisa called out softly, "Keep doing what's right, even when it's small." Nina nodded, the words warming her more than the coffee ever could. As the door clicked shut behind her, Monalisa stood and walked slowly to the window. The city had darkened now. Streetlights blinked to life below, casting puddles and golden halos. Somewhere on Hamilton Road, the mud had likely dried. The street had moved on, but memory was a far less forgiving terrain. She stood still, hands behind her back, eyes scanning the city like a chess master reviewing the board. She hadn't screamed when the mud hit her. She hadn't marched in demanding retribution. But she remembered every face in that van, every voice that had laughed, every shoulder that turned away. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She didn't need to. Instead, she returned to her desk, sat down, and opened her notepad with the kind of grace that makes even paper listen. And then, with deliberate care, she wrote down 5 names. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No scribbles. No fury in the ink. Just clarity. Because Monalisa Campbell didn't strike in anger. She led with consequence. The following morning, the company was buzzing. Whispers floated between desks. Someone saw Maya meet with HR. The 3 followed nervously, hearts thudding like tribal drums. Inside the HR suite, Maya was already seated. She looked up without a smile. "You had a choice yesterday. You chose mockery over decency. That makes you unfit to represent this company." Devin stammered. Marcus tried to charm. Tanya broke into tears. But Maya was unmoved. "Your terminations are effective immediately," Claire announced. "Security will escort you out." As they exited, the rest of the staff watched in stunned silence. The muddy water had dried, but the stain remained. Halcyon Innovations was still the same company on paper, same logo on the wall, same dress code, same morning coffee machine humming in the lounge. But in the air, in the way people paused in the hallway before speaking, in the way chairs were pulled in a little tighter during meetings, something had undeniably shifted. The presence of Maya Campbell wasn't loud. It wasn't thunderous or demanding. It didn't march through offices or throw weight around with titles. It moved like light filtering into a dusty room, gently at first, but undeniable once it had touched everything. Where there had once been casual arrogance, now there was attentiveness. Where whispers used to float behind closed doors, now came directness, accountability, and for the first time in a long while, trust. Fear had been the first wave. When the firings happened, swift, precise, and unquestionable, everyone felt the rumble. Devin, Marcus, and Tanya had all been walked out the front doors within hours of their meeting with HR. Some staff thought Maya would use her position to break everything down, to turn the place into a cold command post where eyes watched from every wall. But she didn't. She built something instead. Maya didn't waste time with vendettas. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Within a week, mentorship programs were launched, pairing younger staff with experienced team leads who actually listened. She met with every department head one-on-one, not to criticize, but to ask, what isn't working, and why haven't you said anything before? Then came the most radical change. An anonymous reporting system, introduced without fanfare. No names, no consequences for speaking, just truth. A channel where staff could finally be honest about bullying, favoritism, bias, even inefficiency. And to everyone's surprise, she read every single entry herself, quietly, privately, and she responded, sometimes through action, sometimes through quiet meetings, but always with follow-through. She turned grievances into growth. Fear began to melt into something else, respect. On her second Thursday in office, she stood in the middle of the open-plan floor and simply asked, does anyone here feel unseen? At first, no one answered. But later that week, a custodian named Elsie, who'd worked there for 7 years and never once been addressed by name, received a handwritten note in her locker. It read, thank you for everything you do. It doesn't go unnoticed. MC. From then on, people started saying her name not in whispers, but with weight. Maya. Not just the new boss. Not just the woman from the van, but the person who made them look inward and act better outward. Nina Price, the junior assistant who once nervously offered coffee and truth in the same breath, found herself called into Maya's office on a Monday morning. She entered cautiously, unsure if she was in trouble or being tested. Maya didn't say much, just gestured to the chair across from her desk. You notice things, she began, and more importantly, you care enough to act. Nina blinked, unsure of what to say. I want that energy closer to the core, Maya continued. You're being promoted to project lead. You'll be overseeing the onboarding and culture development team. Nina's mouth fell open slightly. Me? Yes, you. I don't promote people because of time spent in a seat. I promote people who are already doing the work of leaders before they're given the title. The tears that shimmered in Nina's eyes weren't from pride alone. They were from recognition. Real recognition. She stood, stumbled out a thank you, and left the room with a sense of dignity she'd never felt before. Around the office, others began stepping forward. People who once kept their heads down now spoke with conviction during team huddles. Staff who felt invisible for years found their ideas validated. Their efforts finally met with applause instead of silence. It wasn't a revolution led with fists or flames. It was something softer, but just as powerful. One act of injustice. The mud, the mockery, had become the seed for a new culture. And Maya knew it. One afternoon, as sunlight poured across the office floor like spilled gold, an intern, barely 19, walked toward her desk nervously, holding a bouquet of small sunflowers. His tie was crooked, and he smelled faintly of printer ink and youth. These are for you, he said, cheeks flushed. I just wanted to say you taught us something. Maya looked at the flowers, then at him. Taught you what? That how we treat people when no one's watching matters the most. There was a silence between them, full of meaning. She took the bouquet gently and offered a smile that carried more than thanks. It carried memory, growth, grace, power, she said softly. Is not about titles. It's about how you use your voice when it's your turn. He nodded, his eyes wide. As he turned to leave, she looked out across the open floor. The buzzing of keyboards, the clinking of coffee mugs, the soft hum of focused minds. There was laughter now. Respectful, easy laughter. There were shoulders held higher, back straighter. The office, once brimming with tension and rivalry, now breathed like something alive and evolving. Maya leaned back slightly, letting the moment settle over her. Her story wasn't one of revenge. That would have been too easy. This quiet revolution of values was harder, but it would last. Because legacy wasn't in the firing. It was in the rebuilding. Months had passed like pages turned in a well-written book, each one marked with change, each one layered with meaning. The air around Halcyon Innovations no longer carried the hushed murmurs of discomfort or fear. Instead, it vibrated with purpose. Laughter no longer felt risky. Voices, especially those that had once gone unheard, now filled the space with clarity and courage. Halcyon had become a different kind of company. Not because the logo changed, or the building received a renovation, but because the people inside it had begun to reflect something higher, an unspoken promise to treat one another with dignity. And at the heart of that transformation stood Maya Campbell. It wasn't just what she did. It was how she did it, with restraint, with resolve, and most of all, with grace. When the news broke that Halcyon Innovations had been named one of the most inclusive workplaces in the entire region, it didn't come as a surprise to those who had lived the transformation. What startled them was how quickly it happened. But Maya knew the truth. It hadn't happened quickly. The groundwork had always been there. It simply needed someone brave enough to water the soil. On the night of the televised award ceremony, the hall was bathed in soft golden light. The glass walls reflected a skyline dusted in twilight, and every seat was filled. Leaders from across the corporate sector, CEOs, policy advocates, diversity consultants, and young professionals gathered to witness the celebration. The air buzzed with anticipation, but a deeper current hummed beneath it, reverence. When Maya's name was called, the applause began like steady rain, rising to a crescendo that filled the hall with warmth. She walked onto the stage with the same quiet power that had become her signature, heels clicking gently, head held high, posture poised, but never rigid. She didn't carry a script. She didn't need one. She stood behind the podium, placed both hands on the sides, and let the room fall completely still. Then she spoke. "I was once judged on the street," she began, voice calm but unwavering. "Not for what I did, but for who I appeared to be. I was judged by my skin, by my silence, by the mud on my coat." The room leaned in, held by her honesty. "But I stood tall, not to retaliate," she continued, her eyes scanning the audience, "but to raise a standard for how we lead, how we listen, and how we rise above the noise without ever losing our dignity." A pause, a breath. "And in doing so," she said, her voice slightly softer now, "I discovered that power doesn't always come from a title. Sometimes it comes from restraint, from compassion, and from knowing when to speak, and when to let your actions speak for you." The applause that followed was thunderous. Some stood. Others wiped away quiet tears. Because in that room sat not only business leaders, but also those who had lived the cost of being invisible, unheard, or unfairly judged. In the audience, among a row of attendees who hadn't expected to feel much, sat three men in suits. One of them was Brendan, a former product manager who still exchanged emails with Devin, one of the staff members fired months earlier. He hadn't laughed with Devin that day, but he hadn't spoken up either. And now, watching Maya command the stage with grace, he felt something twist in his chest. Regret. Not because Maya had punished anyone, but because she had grown and taken the entire company with her, while others had stayed behind, stuck in their smallness. The ceremony ended with handshakes and bouquets, photos, and polished speeches. But Maya didn't linger. She thanked those who needed to be thanked, accepted compliments with humility, then stepped away from the lights with her usual quietness. Later that evening, long after the applause had faded, Maya returned to a street she hadn't walked since that unforgettable morning. Hamilton Road. It hadn't changed much. The sidewalk still cracked at the edges. The curb near the bus stop still dipped too low, collecting rainwater that shimmered under the street lamp. The gutter where the van once drove by, now dry and quiet, still told its own kind of story. She stood there for a moment, looking down at the space where it all began. The very ground where a careless splash of muddy water once tried to shrink her. But the wind was in her favor now. It tugged gently at her coat, whispered through her hair, lifted her chin, not as a reminder of what happened, but as a soft recognition of how far she had come. She turned slightly and glanced over her shoulder. In that small moment, something rare happened. She smiled. Not for the past, not for revenge, but for the future, for the voices that had been found, for the respect that had become non-negotiable, for every woman who had ever been dismissed because of her silence, her skin, or her strength. Back at Halcyon, earlier that day, a new portrait had been unveiled in the leadership wing. Framed in smooth mahogany, it captured Maya seated in her office, her hands gently folded on the desk, her eyes focused but kind. Beneath the frame, a quote was engraved in gold. "Lead with grace, but never excuse cruelty." It was more than a message. It was a mirror, a reflection of everything Maya Campbell had done and everything she had refused to become. Her story was never just about a puddle, or a van, or a cruel laugh from a passing window. It was about what she chose to do when given the chance to strike. She chose to lead, and in doing so, she gave others permission to stand taller, speak clearer, and act better. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. And that is the kind of legacy that can never be washed away. If you enjoyed Maya Campbell's story of grace, power, and transformation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. What are your thoughts on how it all ended for Devin, Marcus, Tanya, and Nina? Rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10, and let us know what part moved you most. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. Your feedback helps us keep telling meaningful stories.